Hello and welcome to the Legal Edition. I'm your host, Attorney Mary Kay Loyan. Our topic today, the war on women by states and the federal government. Our guests include attorneys from Legal Momentum, an advocacy group based in New York City. We have Azalea Kalia, Legal Director at Legal Momentum, overseeing the organization's litigation and policy initiatives. We also have Sahar Kawaha, Director of Economic Justice at Legal Momentum and leading the Women Valued initiatives. Let's welcome our guests. Welcome, everyone.
Thank you.
There has been a concerted war on women by this administration, whether it's women's rights with regards to reproductive justice, women immigrants. Azalea, let's start with you. What have you seen with regards to this issue?
Well, first, I want to say thank you so much for having us. It's a real pleasure to be here with you talking about these issues. Thank you for shining a light on this and sounding the alarm of what's going on. So I think that we're seeing a lot of attacks coming at us from every angle, whether it's reproductive justice, economic justice, and just the atmosphere that we're living in right now. In the post in a post-Dobbs reality, and in a system that seems really hell-bent on intimidating and bullying marginalized communities. And we are standing tall in the face of this relentless attack. I think that this administration is making it very, very clear that they are really pushing, white Christian nationalist values and really impeding the rights and opportunities of others that may not fit that mold. Women, people of color, immigrants. I mean, immigrants have been bearing the brunt of this war, and then the fact that we just had a judge, an immigration judge, arrested by the FBI is really stark call to action and to awareness around the country that this isn't just about immigrant communities. This is about all our liberties. If people could be disappeared off the street without due process, that is a threat to all of us, regardless of what your beliefs are, regardless of who you are. So I think we should start there, that this is a campaign of chaos and cruelty and confusion that is wreaking havoc among the most vulnerable communities and the most underserved, and who have already been pushed out to the margins.
Yeah, Sahar, you're also an attorney with Legal Momentum, and you work in the civil rights area. Can you tell us a little about what you see from your perspective?
Yeah, of course. I mean, I think we are seeing very comprehensive attacks attempting to dismantle the rights of women and people of color. And when we think about it, I think women of color it's one of the populations that is most marginalized, most underserved in our country. And we really need to keep that in mind as we think about the policies that are coming out, because we were already so far behind, and now we're really being taken back in time. We've seen a host of executive orders that are attacking women's rights to economic security at every single level. We have, challenges to the Equal Credit Opportunity Act, enforcement under that, and that's a law that's been passed to prevent discrimination for women seeking credit and loans, and that's a law that was passed in 1974. So these are all very longstanding laws. We see uh, executive orders rescinding, orders that were passed under the Johnson administration in 1965, in which the anti-discrimination requirements were being imposed on federal contractors, and those requirements have been really essential in terms of creating equal opportunity for women and people of color. We are seeing the dismantling of the Department of Education, which, women's lack of access to equal opportunity in education is, has been the stepping stone to the lack of equal opportunity in employment and the ability to have financial security. Um, we are seeing the pulling of funding for programs to advance diversity, equity, inclusion, both in the federal government, but for, any entity that's receiving federal funding, and that those impacts are so far-reaching. And I'm happy to talk about that more. And then just the kind of, I love the executive order that talks about defending gender ideology, where the administration is really just trying to eliminate the broader concept of gender, which is just a more inclusive way of thinking about these issues. And so kind of those are just the executive orders, right? But what we're seeing is in the employment context and the economic context is an attempt to really eliminate or longstanding protections that safeguard against discrimination in employment and in the economic sphere for women and people of color. And that compounded with everything else is really creating huge impacts
Now,
because
one of the things I want to stop you there for a moment. The work on childcare. Childcare is essential for any woman who works. And I know the administration is advocating for people to have more children, but at the same time, they're cutting funding for school meals, for childcare. Um, doesn't all this add up to a war on women, and in addition to the reproductive issues that are coming to play into this administration as well?
Yeah, I think it just speaks to the hypocrisy of this administration. They're saying that they're pro-family and pro. They're not even saying they're pro-children or families. They're saying they're pro-birth, really. And what the administration proposed in terms of educating women about their menstrual cycles so that they know when they were ovulating is so offensive, and it's such an insult to people all across this country. What people need to have healthy, strong families is a safety net and a support system and programs that actually support working families. We need paid family leave. We need childcare. We need guaranteed health care. We need mental health care. And what this administration, on the one hand, they're saying that they're pro kids, but on the other, they're going to propose an $880 billion cut to Medicaid, which, by the way, covers almost half of births in this country, not to mention, very critical healthcare for women and kids. They're proposing ridiculous cuts to food stamps, the Supplemental Nutrition Assistance Program. And all of these programs that would actually help women and families and kids are being gutted. And on the one hand, they're saying that they're so pro families and really want to support families and kids and moms, but they're doing the exact opposite through these harmful actions.
Well, could it be that the real purpose behind this is to eliminate low-income women, so they will not be having children, so that only the well-established, wealthy people can have children? Could that be part of this plan?
I think that is a definite possibility, and we were discussing this internally, and it is clear through their actions that even though they're not going to overtly say that, that is absolutely what's going on, because you're having these mass deportations of people, but at the same time offering money bonuses to mothers and offering medals to moms who have more than 6 kids. Like, this is insane what's happening right now in this country. And the fact that, we have all these attacks on DEI programs, whereas there's complete lack of accountability towards what the administration is doing and upholding, these people who have, alleged misconduct and have, engaged in security breaches on behalf of, this nation's, military strategy, that's all fine. but let's blame, marginalized communities for all the ills that is happening in this country. It just really reeks of hypocrisy. And the fact that they're also shutting down and censoring and silencing anyone that goes in opposition to these plans and these strategies, like all the pre-compliance around DEI is really scary. And of course silencing law firms and lawyers in our profession who are trying to oppose what they're doing, because what they're doing is unconstitutional and illegal.
Azalea, did you want to talk about covenant marriage?
Sure. So what this means is that people, instead of having avenues in order to exit harmful marriages, or be able to secure divorces for themselves in case of like irretrievable breakdown in the marriage, or if there's abuse in the marriage, covenant marriage, which is, I think, happening at least in 4 states right now, would lock people into marriage for their life, would require people to get religious counseling before entering into marriage. So putting more and more restrictions on women's ability to, secure safety for themselves, secure their own, stability and independence, and at a time when there's already so many restrictions on women's liberties, the fact that states are piling on and adding even more. We had obviously the limitations around reproductive justice, but now states are making it harder even to just leave abusive marriages, or leave marriages that, for whatever reason, women do not want to be in, or people do not want to be in. So, it's really compounding, the limitations and the lack of liberty that states are imposing on women across the country.
So that's a contractual marriage. It's a written contract.
Essentially, it requires that people have this kind of religious understanding that it is a marriage, between a man and a woman, and it involves God and the church, and the tenets, that they have to adhere to. So it's not promoting or fostering people's independence or ability to choose the course of their life, or to choose if they want to be in a marriage or not. It's saying that they have to be in this for a life. And the state is saying this, and this is very concerning, especially when you have limitations around, other actions that women can take. And when we're talking about limitations on reproductive freedom as well, I like to remind people that, from the course of my work, representing survivors, pregnancy and postpartum periods are times of increased lethality for women. And so when states are already, making it hard to access healthcare, and on top of that, making it hard to exit abusive marriages, it is a very, very dangerous time for women in America right now.
Let's shift gears a little bit right now to you said that they're putting all these stops and preventing people from pretty much their own civil rights, enjoying their own civil rights. What about the women in the military? There's women who have been disenfranchised from something that they've worked very hard for, saying that they don't belong there. Do you think that's a message, that these women should be home having children and not be in the military? How do you take, either one of you? What do you think about that?
Absolutely. I think that, this administration is hell-bent on, taking us back, undoing all the progress and all the achievements and all the accomplishments that we have been able to secure for gender justice. They really want to take us back to a time when we had like the traditional gender values, of a mom who's at home, in the kitchen taking care of children, while we have a white cis man husband going out and being the breadwinner. I think that is really where this country wants to head, and I think that it's a really critical moment for our movement.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, taking it back to the 1950s. That's really where this is going.
Even before.
Mm-hmm. Leave it to Beaver, and Father knows best. Now, I'm sorry.
I think Sahir wanted to add something.
Oh, sure. Go ahead, right ahead.
Yeah, I would also just add that, I think the types of prohibitions or limitations that the current administration are imposing are in fact exactly like the laws and policies that were in place prior to the enactment of the Civil Rights Act. So we're talking about laws that and policies that were preventing married teachers from being able to gain employment because there was this discriminatory assumption that if you're married, you're not as focused, you're not as dedicated. That is a stereotype that's carried out through today that we are constantly fighting in the courts and in our culture and in our systems. We also had laws that were, requiring women to retire earlier, and that was drastically reducing the pensions that they were earning. We had laws that were preventing women from working 8-hour days, again, limiting their ability to earn the same as men in the spheres in which they were working. And then, speaking to laws and policies that were preventing women from accessing the same credit and loans because they were required to get their husbands or a man to co-sign on that loan. And so those were specifically, some of the very like blatant forms of discriminatory laws and policies that were in
And
place.
that wasn't that long ago. Those were in the 1970s.
Yeah,
So,
I mean, they started early and they persisted. And I think one of the scary things is thinking about how close in our past they were. And, when we think about the Trump administration and sometimes when he's talking about merit-based, moving us back to a merit-based system, I think it's really important for us to recognize that, our system and our economy at that point was one of the most expansive affirmative action programs for white men and their families, right? Because there were all of these very targeted policies in place that specifically carved women out from the same economic opportunity. And so when Title VII was enacted, it was enacted under a bipartisan administration with the targeted goal of affirmatively, and that's the term that Johnson used at the time, to affirmatively reverse the discriminatory conduct that was carving out and excluding women and people of color from accessing the same benefits, the same opportunities. And so it's really important that we raise visibility around that.
right. And part of that was discriminating against women in teaching and in other occupations that were more male occupied at the time. So we're going back in time, which is, not progressive at all. And the outcome cannot be good. One of the things, too, I want to talk about is the issues of pregnancy and pregnancy surveillance. I don't know if either one of you is well versed in that topic. I know we've talked about EMTALA in the past with regards to women, needing reproductive health care, emergency health care. Can either one of you talk on that particular topic?
I can start.
Okay.
I think that, in the face of the dissemination of the protections guaranteed by Roe, which was, Supreme Court, as you know, precedent for nearly half a century, there was a reliance, like people relied on this right. And, to see a constitutional right being stripped from Americans across this country is really a alarm. It's a very, very loud alarm about what a slippery slope we're on. Because if this one constitutional right is under jeopardy, and it has been eliminated, others will be as well. I think it's only a matter of time. And we are seeing this about, with reproductive justice across the country. So many people in this country, almost like half, are living under healthcare bans or very, very strict limitations on healthcare. And the fact that we even had this issue around emergency care going up to the Supreme Court is really terrifying, and it should concern every American. It should worry everyone that essentially states can now pick and choose who is going to receive stabilizing care for an emergency medical condition is really terrifying. And that is just one example. We're seeing, states across the country that are, introducing bills to, criminalize abortion care, not only for the providers who actually, medical doctors or practitioners who do the care, but for people aiding and abetting in someone getting an abortion, and for the pregnant patient themselves, to consider that such a basic fundamental right as as the right to determine your future, determine what happens to your body,
The
is now
bodily autonomy,
potentially
right?
under legal system, um, should concern everyone.
Mhm.
It is really a shocking time. I mean, it's really bringing us back. Pre-Roe, there were so many illegal procedures being administered across the country, and people were dying. And that is exactly what's going to happen in this country today. And it's only going to further impact the inequality and inequities that we see today. Poor women of color are already feeling, so marginalized and having this lack of access to healthcare. And this is only going to make it worse. And it's just going to drive up the rates of maternal mortality in our country.
Now, aren't they already criminalizing miscarriages? What have you seen with regards to that?
Yes, we have seen that in some of the southern states. People are being charged with, murder for having miscarriages. And I just want to say something, Mary Kay. Pregnancy is not a benign condition. Things can and do go wrong. And for the state or for a government to intervene in someone's medical condition is really unconscionable, and just to take people's confidence away in the healthcare system and also in practitioners and doctors and the medical field to you know question their ability to provide care for patients. It's impacting everyone, and I hope that we can stand up to these horrible trends that we're seeing.
It speaks to what a harmful time we are in for women in particular, that we have an administration that is trying to provide these kind of perverse incentives at the front end for women to get pregnant, but being completely blind to the realities of first what it means to be pregnant, but also what this administration, the policies it's driving for women who become pregnant, which is the reality is that you could become pregnant and have a miscarriage and be criminalized for that miscarriage. And that puts women in such a dangerous place. That speaks to to one aspect of the dangers. I think the other aspect of the danger is just the complete blindness to the economic cost and reality, the physical, you know, health cost and realities of having a child. It is a very, very difficult thing to go through. And it impacts both the well-being of the woman, the family, and the children. And so I think, when I think back to when I made the decision to have my kids, it was a choice. And that has been central in terms of being able to do it in a safe way. And I really feel like so many of the ways in which the administration is acting now, it's setting it up, this whole concept of child rearing as a trap, really, because you can't, you're giving this incentive to women, and then you're trying to have them turn a blind eye to all of the things that they're going to have to cope and face with, especially in an administration that's putting up very concrete barriers to women thriving in those conditions.
Mhm. Well, they're also trying to pass the SAVE Act, which makes it harder for women who have married to cast their vote. That's something that's being voted on now, and I find that very troubling.
It is very troubling, but it aligns with, their vision for this country. It aligns with what they're trying to do. They are completely reshaping the federal government, and they are completely reshaping the trajectory of this country. Like, everything that we fought so hard to achieve is being systematically knocked down. I mean, you had, Elon Musk with, like, his
Chainsaw.
just like completely taking a sledgehammer to everything that we built. That I think that is, part of the strategy here. And, dismantling the Department of Education also feeds into that. They don't want, people getting an education. They want very much to revert to these, pre-1950s or even pre-1920s, because, we don't really want women voting. We just want them to be at home having babies.
Yeah.
I mean,
Don't want
there was just some statement from, I didn't even know that this actually was a thing in the White House, but there's a White House Office of Faith. And the woman who leads it was saying that, it's really God's plan to have women, answer to their husbands. And the fact that this is an office in the White House and that this is speaking on behalf of this administration, is really scary.
Yeah, that's the same woman that's saying if you give her $1,000, you'll be in God's good graces and you'll receive God's blessings. So I don't put much stock in what she has to say. She seems like she's part of the con, let's say. You had something you wanted to say about pregnancy surveillance.
Yeah, I just wanted to build off, what Azalea had been talking about to also mention that I think in this year alone, 12 states have introduced legislation to recognize fetal personhood, which means to recognize a fetus as a person. And I think sometimes we think of that as, something that's happening elsewhere for some of us who are in states that don't have laws like that on the books or are not contemplating it. But I really think it is on every woman to take this trajectory really seriously, because one of the areas where Legal Momentum does a lot of work is in the area of pregnancy surveillance. And so one thing we've seen through both women we've spoken through our helpline, but also women we've represented, is that medical providers and hospitals around the country are 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 screening women. And this could be as early as, when you just go in for a regular gynecological visit. It could be when you go in, whether you know you're pregnant or not, for a visit. And they oftentimes ask questions. Do you drink alcohol? Do you take any drugs? And women answer those questions, I think, oftentimes truthfully, thinking they're doing it for the purposes of their medical care. But what we're seeing is that medical providers are making notations of that, right? Anywhere from 2 years before you ever get pregnant, before you even know you want to be pregnant. You may not even get pregnant intentionally, right? And then they're using that to potentially test you without your knowledge or consent for drugs if you do end up being pregnant. And then potentially they're reporting you to Child Protective Services for child abuse and maltreatment, if and when a baby is born, right? And all of that testing, all of that surveillance happens during the course of pregnancy, maybe even before you're pregnant. But it deeply impacts your entire life, and it has to do with the time when you don't have a child, right? And so I think when we think about the concept of fetal personhood and the laws that are being enacted, every single person who has the capacity to get pregnant really needs to take these laws so seriously, because even in these are practices we're seeing happen in states like New York and Connecticut and New Jersey, and hospitals are still doing them, and we're facing barriers in challenging them and eliminating those barriers, even though we're doing advocacy at every single level to
What about
eliminate.
HIPAA? What about HIPAA? Doesn't that have anything to do here?
I mean, you would think so, but I think when you dig deep down and you look at the laws, women's privacy is treated, again, very differently in the context when you're seeking gynecological or reproductive or perinatal care, because hospitals all of a sudden treat women as half a person, right? You don't necessarily have the same privacy rights. And it's not to say that anything has said you don't have the same privacy rights. It's just that we have had to challenge these practices to say that women deserve the same privacy rights as any other patient, that you shouldn't be subjected to drug testing without your knowledge and consent. And that's something, it goes to broader constitutional protections for any individual. But it's very difficult to challenge because of the cultural norms and stigmas around pregnant women and this idea that we can judge and surveil them for things they do during the course of pregnancy.
Now, that's an amazing invasion of privacy. It's just amazing. And I think a
Yeah.
lot of women don't know that. They also don't know that if they get pregnant and they have a miscarriage and they enter a state that, says that providers can't provide health care, they're in a problem right now. And
Oh,
I
it's
don't see.
awful. It's awful what's happening. I mean, we had women being told to go bleed out in parking lots. We had women being airlifted out of the state to get necessary stabilizing care. That's where we are right now. And we are very, quickly going down this slippery slope where, everyone should be concerned because, you know, this is not just about women or, poor people. It's really about liberties for all Americans that don't adhere to the mold that this administration is trying to promote.
It's a very concerning time we live in. Very concerning. So, in closing, do either one of you have any stories you want to share, or anything of about this war on women? Where do you see it going, and what can women do to help stop this runaway train?
Well, I think the first thing right now, the most critical piece of this is we need to stop all these funding cuts and funding freezes for services and programs that fund services that support women, support survivors of gender-based violence, support, families and kids. Even our funding is under threat right now because we had submitted an application to the Office on Violence Against Women for a grant to provide services and supports to survivors of gender-based violence. And that notice of funding opportunity has been rescinded. The administration is not communicating in any meaningful way about what is happening with those funding opportunities. I mean, I think that they're probably, terminated, which is, of course, illegal because only Congress can do that. That money has already been appropriated. And the fact that, you know, Trump, is holding himself out to be this king, we're just signing these harmful executive orders and taking rights away and funding and supports with the stroke of a pen is really dangerous. So I think the first thing is we have to really band together in coalition with our partners and speak with a unified voice that this is harming communities across our country, people in the most vulnerable, underserved conditions. And we need to stand up for them, and we will.
Right. And violence against women is a real thing. It's a real thing, and I don't see a whole lot being done right now about that.
Well, not when you have, the president, in the White House having been an adjudicated to have committed sexual offenses, and what he was gloating about grabbing women, and he filled his cabinet with people that have allegations against them. It doesn't really invoke trust or confidence for women across the country when you have, these leaders.
Sarah, do you have any closing things you like to say before we sign off?
Yeah, I would just, to build off of, the really important points that Azealia made, I would just also, we have to remember that at least, at the federal level, as a starting point, the bulk of what the current administration is doing is unlawful, and it is through administrative or executive action that cannot undo the underlying legislation that Mary Kay, you pointed out, like, the practices are, from the past. So the legislation is also longstanding, right? And so these are things that have been enacted with bipartisan support that we've been enforcing and pushing forward for decades. And so it's really important that we stand up for those laws and that we litigate, right? We have to keep litigating, even though, our courts and their authority are in question. It's really critical. And then I think we also need to remember that, so much of what the administration keeps saying is that they want to give the authority to the states. And what we are seeing as a gender justice organization is that states across the country, while they're passing really terrible laws in many jurisdictions, even, from liberal to conservative states are passing critical laws that are absolutely essential for women and families. They're passing laws to enact paid sick time, to increase the minimum wage, to establish paid family leave, to establish safe leave for survivors of gender-based violence. These are so important. In Missouri, for example, there's a battle to uphold their ballot initiative that was moved to enact an increase in the minimum wage and sick time and for basic protections and supports. We need to be rallying to keep pushing for these laws at the state level because, they apply, and to defend the ones that are under attack.
Mhm. I say call your congressperson, call your senator, get out there. And we've seen it all across the country. People are being very vocal about their rights, and rightfully so. Well, this has been very enlightening. I appreciate both your input here, and I look forward to continuing this conversation, hopefully in a better trajectory in the near future. Thank you both.
Thank you. And I would just, like to encourage people to go visit our website. You can learn about the work that we're doing. You can actually access our helpline if you have any legal question that you're struggling with right now. We're happy to talk to you and give you some advice and information.
That's great. Thank you for that information. I want to thank our guests for sharing their insights and opinions on the issues facing women today. I also want to thank you, our viewers, for tuning in. For more information on today's topic and our guests, visit us online at thelegaledition.com. As always, this information is for general educational purposes only. It is not to be construed as legal or personal advice. So please consult a qualified practitioner as to your own legal needs. And don't forget, subscribe to our publication on Substack, our channel on YouTube, find us on Facebook, Instagram, and now Blue Sky.